I'm Dr. Nick. You may know me from such communities as Spiceworks, MangoCon, and WebRoot. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm a community manager, former IT person who got into community management along the way, and it seemed to have stuck. I'm just happy I found some people who are willing to pay me to just hang out online all day, which is great for me. I worked in IT, and then I worked at Spiceworks for about 5 years. I'm now working at WebRoot, doing both WebRoot's online community and also participating on MangoCon and Spiceworks as a WebRoot representative. And a large part of my job involves giving out free key codes. So I brought a big stack of them, so come see me after the presentation if you don't have a WebRoot key code, or yours has run out, or you need one for your grandmother or something.
So that's how I can work.
Yeah, keep getting free key codes. All right, sounds good. So I have a couple different presentations that I stole. I was lazy and didn't write my own. So I wanted to poll the audience and see what you guys were interested in hearing about. The first presentation, it kind of goes over a little bit about how WebRoot works, current state of the industry, and some tips for avoiding crypto ransomware. The other presentation is more of a deep dive into the state of crypto ransomware specifically, all the different variants out there, how they work, stuff like that. So who wants the first presentation? Who wants the second presentation? All right, sounds like that one's more popular. I could potentially go through both of them. This one's kind of the longer one, so I'll start with it, and if we have extra time, we can go into it. All right, so I am not Tyler Moffat. That's the guy I stole this slide deck. He is one of our senior threat researchers, so it's his job to go out there and see what's new, download it, reverse engineer it, figure out how it works. They have a whole separate network from the WebRoot network called the Red Network, which is open to the network, and that's where they do their research. So basically, he keeps an eye on what's going on out there, and he does some really good presentations and slide decks on exactly how everything works and what's new and what's out there. So we'll jump into some of that stuff. All right, so we have this threat brief we put out every quarter or twice a year or something. That's kind of a state of the what's going on in the world of ransomware and other viruses and infections. Talk a little bit about the attack vectors they're currently using. Some new ransomware variants that are out there right now that are the latest and greatest. Some stuff from Black Hat, and then there's a couple tips about stopping ransomware. The other slide deck has a little bit more on that, so we can jump into that at the end if you like. Oh, and by the way, feel free to interrupt me with questions at any time if you want to know more about what's going on. So because we have this cloud-based setup, we collect a lot of data from millions of endpoints all over the world. So it gives us a lot of information about what's going on out there. So there's millions of instances of malware and POAs, potentially unwanted applications, so bundleware, toolbars, stuff like that. One of the technologies that people don't know about as much as the cloud-based stuff is that we go out there, we bought a company called BrightCloud, and what they do is they scan the entire IP address space and URLs multiple times a day to kind of keep a database of what's a legitimate site and what's not, what's a phishing site. We do the same thing for mobile apps, and then we kind of put that all together to have a good picture of what's going on out there. So yeah, BrightCloud I mentioned. They classify and score most of the internet, entire IP4 and 6 space. We've got billions of file records. We've got millions of mobile apps, and 10 plus million endpoints out there gathering data that powers all of this. So each day there's about 6,000 new phishing sites that launch. A lot of the phishing sites now, they just launch, come up for a day, and then go back down. 80,000 new malware instances and 51,000 new mobile malware apps that, anything new that appears in the Google Play Store, we download and categorize automatically. The big takeaway is everything is polymorphic now. So any instance of a file or malware that makes it into your network or through email is most likely going to be scrambled and individualized for you, so that way it's very easy for them to evade any kind of signature-based detection, because it's not going to match the fingerprint of the same malware that, hasn't been scrambled the previous time. Let's see. So yeah, less than 50 examples per malware variant. So each variant that you see is pretty much unique. It only gets used a handful of times. They target you specifically. They redo the malware when they're sending it to the next person, so that it looks different every time. So it's very hard to keep up with a signature-based approach. So some of the things that happened this year: the Angler exploit kit cyber gang was arrested. So this was a big gang that was behind a particular variant. And another variant, Neutrino, stepped in to take up their market share. And there's about 10 or so other major exploit kits out there that are competing for market share. So it's really like any other business. They're trying to get the largest share of the ransomware market. Yep.
Take a second to explain, these are guys that are forming companies.
Yes. So yeah, these are gangs. They may be anywhere: China, Russia, Eastern Europe. They run like major businesses now. They have CFOs and CMOs, and there's a lot of money that comes from crypto ransomware. So, these are well-organized, well-run machines. And if you take down one set of them, another one will step in and fill the gap. It's very difficult, obviously, like Hydra, yes. Unless the local governments are really on board, it's very hard to go in and arrest them. We're not going to send strike teams into Russia to arrest some cyber criminal gang who's paid off the local police and is funneling money to whoever, would otherwise be taking them down. In fact, I think one of these guys got taken down because instead of targeting foreign operations, they targeted local people in Russia. So finally the Russians were like, all right, we're sick of this. Take these guys down because they're targeting us now. So they got a bit greedy. All right, so yeah, the Angler arrests, after that happened, decrease in malware volume, in encounter rates, and in samples per variant of malware. But despite all this, the other guys are continually innovating. You're seeing other folks stepping in to fill in those gaps. Same thing with BOAs. Those dropped a little bit. But they still use, the same kind of malware tactics to try and infect. So this is stuff that's not necessarily encrypting ransomware. It's just ad hijackers and annoying toolbars and stuff like that. That's more of an annoyance than a business stopper, but potentially unwanted application. So bundleware, toolbars, ad browser hijackers, stuff like that. And some of these are legit, some of them are illegit, the way we classify them. So if it has the checkbox at install time saying, do you want the ask.com toolbar? And if you install it, it's easily removable from add remove programs, then we allow it because they're following the rules. If it's installing itself silently in the background or it's not easy to remove, then we consider that malicious and we, block it or attempt to block it. Android malware, so that is spiking a lot, 300% growth in Android apps, 500% growth in malicious apps and PUAs. And again, there's so much crap that's in the Google Play Store, it's hard for them to keep track of what's legitimate and what isn't. So we attempt to do that for them and protect you. And also, people who are sideloading apps and, installing the APK directly. Again, there's not much quality control there. So you want something in place that's going to protect you. So some demographic stuff. Fastest growth of new apps is in China. Trojan's still the most popular category. A lot of adware apps have rooting functionality. Just because you download it from the Google Play Store or even the Apple Store doesn't mean it's safe. You know, they still manage to sneak stuff in there past the approval. And ransomware is still something you have to worry about. They're also targeting a lot of older versions of Android OS because people tend not to update their phones. So make sure that you are updating everything that's on your network. And they'll go after, you know, if Pokemon Go is popular, so you'll see a crop of Pokemon Go imitated apps or infected versions of the real app so that they try and get people to trick them into downloading something like that. Some Android trends, you have 420% increase in rootkits, 525 Trojans, 725% adware. You'll see that it kind of spans the gamut of different types of apps, so there's no particular category that's safer than any other. You know, they could be infecting anything, whether it's a tool or a, you know, entertainment app, anything. Games are a big slice of the pie, obviously. Phishing sites, so they're using JavaScript now to stop you from leaving the page. They're trying to evade any kind of detection in any way that they can. So our main approach for blocking phishing attempts is to try and stop you from going there in the first place. So we'll intercept any URL requests and look it up in our database before we let you go to that site. So 92% chance of visiting a zero-day phishing site. And like I said, these sites come and go very quickly because they bring them up, they take them down. That way, you know, whitelist and blacklist blocking is very hard to keep up with because unless you're continually scanning the space like we're doing, you know, you're not good, those lists are going to be out of date within a day or two. So yeah, so far in 2016, there's been more phishing pages just in, you know, so far in the year than the entirety of the previous year. So again, people are bringing these sites up and down very quickly. So Yahoo is the biggest target at the moment, which is displacing some of the other ones. It used to be PayPal was the most popular. Banks are targeted a lot. So Canadian Bank of Commerce here is one of the biggest financial targets. And dating sites is another big category that they're going after. So trying to trick you into answering a, you know, request from a dating site, but it's really a phishing email. And then again, all of the social networking sites, they're going to attempt to put malware in there, whether it's via post or, you know, malware ads. So again, the Angler arrest had a big impact on the volume of threats, but new exploit kits are coming out all the time. Threats are continually evading detection because they're always trying to find a way around all the various kinds of protection. More Android threats are making it into the store. And phishing is still the primary method of attempting to trick people into either downloading a malicious app or going to a malicious site. All right, so let's jump into some of the attack vectors. So again, they're trying to trick people into opening malicious attachments for the most part. So your accounting folks, they're going to be receiving invoices all day long. You know, they'll get emails from people they don't know saying you owe us money, here's the invoice. They open the file, it's got, you know, they enable macros, and boom, you know, there's an infection in there. So we're seeing a lot of ones pretending to be from the post office. Sorry? IRS, yeah. Anything that looks official is going to scare people into opening it, or, you know, telling them they've got a package. So they're like, ooh, somebody's delivering something to me. I better open that up. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, in a larger company, it's like the volume of stuff that gets delivered. You don't know who ordered what from whom. So, let's see. FBI is estimating 2.2 billion in losses so far this year, and about 800 million in 2015. Yeah. So again, they're using macros a lot. So, they trick people into opening a file. They give them a message saying, hey, you need to enable macros to see this. And people just click through that and do that because they don't know any better. So they'll get a message saying, this file is protected by Microsoft Office, and you have to enable the content to see the document. So that's a trick that they use to get you to click on enable content. So you have to really train your users to, not click on that button or remove their permissions to do so. Sorry? Remove their permissions. Yeah, exactly. And not many people actually use macros legitimately in their work, and those that do, should receive additional training. So as soon as you enable the macro, it resolves a URL, it downloads a payload file into the documents folder, and then it runs that in the background, and it's all automated. So once you've clicked enable, that all just happens through the macro. Your endpoint protection will have two opportunities to interrupt that process. So they may catch the URL as being bad when the macro is trying to go out online and go to that site, or it may scan the payload that's downloaded and say, hey, wait a minute, this looks illegitimate, and block it there. But if it doesn't, happen to catch either of those actions, then the encryption process starts. So this one is the Locky variant that you see here, showing some of the code of what it looks like when it's running. So this is the Angler BDEP, I think it's pronounced, and neutrino exploit kits. So these have been around for a couple of years, but they are continually evolving. So the guys writing this code, they're updating it. They're using new ways of getting in, updating the code to evade detection. They specifically write stuff in there to try and detect what AV you have running and disable it or do an end run around it. And it's about 80% are from this family. They're attacking Flash Player, Java, Word macros, Silverlight vulnerabilities. I just read online as I was traveling here, Publisher has macro capability that can also be attacked. So it's not just Word docs. Any Microsoft application that allows you to run a macro can be an attack vector. Some of these are trying to get smart in evading the research process. So they'll try and detect if they're running on a VM or in some kind of protected space, and they won't do their malicious activity until they detect they're running on bare metal. So that way they try and stop our researchers from figuring out what's going on. And as I mentioned, this stuff is insanely lucrative. $3 million a month, and this is from people just paying the Bitcoin ransoms. Cryptocurrency is very hard to trace. They don't have to launder the money anymore, so catching these gangs is very difficult. So there's very low risk for them for very high upside in terms of the payout from the ransomware. And then since Angler got taken down, Neutrino is now kind of in the #1 spot. Any questions on this stuff so far? I don't think we try and stop you from doing that because obviously people, need to do that. A lot of times the ransomware itself will give you instructions like here, go to this site, or they'll help you get on to Tor or some other, method of getting your Bitcoins and sending it to them. It can be a challenge for the non-technically savvy. So for the home user who gets hit, in fact, I think there was some NPR podcast where they did a story on some poor person whose home files got encrypted and she didn't have a backup. And it was kind of the longest part of the story was her trying to figure out how to get Bitcoins. And she wasn't able to do it online. She actually found a Bitcoin ATM in New Jersey and went there and tried to purchase Bitcoins and she had to get her daughter to help her do it. And then I think finally, she's able. And the other thing is these ransomwares, they'll put a deadline. Like if you don't pay in 24 hours, the price doubles. So she was coming up against the wire to get the Bitcoins and pay that. Fortunately, there's a lot of semi-legitimate or legitimate places now where you can send Bitcoins. Like there's Circle is a phone app where you can just convert currency to Bitcoins. So it's gotten a lot more user-friendly to send cryptocurrency, so they don't have to worry about that as much. And then if you guys get hit, obviously you're going to know what to do to send them the ransom. So a lot of times they rely on the more technically savvy people that the affected people get hit by to be the ones actually paying the ransom. So, and there's a slide later on that talks about a new cryptocurrency that's coming out that a lot of them are switching to. So they're moving a bit away from Bitcoins into some other newer, more friendly for them and harder to trace currencies. So this is an example of a malware payload. This is CryptXXX. So what they do is they trick, legitimate advertising operations into giving a payload through the ads. So you click on an ad thinking it's something legitimate, and instead it attempts to download something onto your system. So, at this point, we're almost recommending ad blockers just for security reasons rather than for annoyance reasons, because any ad network can get hit by this kind of stuff. No matter how legitimate, there may be malware payloads in an ad click. So here's another one that's using a...
Social media that does not use ad networks is a great place to use ads.
Yeah, exactly. So this uses out-of-date WordPress plugin to try and attack you. So WordPress sites, especially with all the extensions and plugins, it's some of the most insecure environment. So it's very easy to throw up a WordPress site and not secure it at all, and then somebody hacks your site and puts a malicious payload in there. And again, like I mentioned, they're trying to stifle the research process. So it looks for security software. So you see in here, they're looking for Wireshark, Fiddler, ESET, VMware tools. So they're trying to see what's running on the machine to make sure that they're evading detection if it is a research type setup or if there's some kind of antivirus or protection running. So once it goes through this process and says, I don't see anything listening, then I'll run Command Shell, run the script to download the actual payload and start running it. So they won't even give you the payload if they detect that you're running anything that's trying to watch what's going on. So that way we can't download the payload and analyze it. So they're trying to get very tricky with this kind of cat and mouse game with the research community. So malvertising, so booby-trapped ads submitted to legitimate ad networks. So there's a lot of onus on the ad networks to be a bit more, reliable in terms of screening what's out there. But obviously, there's millions of ads running, and that's a big workload. Same thing as evaluating apps that go into Google Play or iOS Store. So they rotate through with normal ads. They try and kind of hide in the masses of ads that are out there. So you visit a site with an affected ad, redirects you to an exploit landing page where it can download the malicious code, and then that software gets installed, and it's usually encrypting ransomware through these ad malware drive-bys. All right, so let's take an overview of encrypting ransomware. So CryptXXX. So this is from the folks that brought you Reviton FBI Lock. These guys are continually updating their software. It's using exploit kits, malvertising, hacked websites. Default payment is $500 in the equivalent of Bitcoins. And it's now using Neutrino after Angler got shut down. It also drops the Drydex infection. So we'll try and steal credentials off of the machine it infects. So here's The file it gives you kind of tells you what to do. They're going pretty bare bones lately, so you'll just have a text file with instructions on what to do. They're kind of moving away from the fancy UIs here. Crypto mix, so doesn't use any kind of payment on the darknet. All communications done via emailed links to encrypted messages. The encrypted messages are just displayed once, so you can't save them. And it's very expensive, so it's almost $3,000 in Bitcoin equivalent. And this was the one that says they will give you free tech support to help you unencrypt their files once you pay them. And they also made the outrageous claim that a portion of this ransom was going to charity to try and make you feel better about paying the ransom. Yeah, exactly. No indication if any charity actually received any of this money. So here's what that looks like. They're very helpful here, saying, not your language, use Google Translate to translate this file. They're trying to pretend that they're being helpful and encrypting and protecting your information, and now you have to pay them. And again, there's a countdown timer, so if you don't pay them, they start upping the ransom, which puts pressure on you. So this is using the one-time private messages that you use to send the money back and forth, rather than using having you get on Tor and send money that way. So it's kind of like remember Get Smart, where you'd have this, or no, was it Mission Impossible that had the self-destructing messages? Yeah. So it's kind of like that. Yeah. So yeah, here's the one-time message that you get. It says, best regards, charity team down the bottom. And again, they want 5 Bitcoins, which at current exchange rates is about $3,000. And they're offering 3 years of PC support along with that, and that the money goes to charity. And again, this is the only one that's using this kind of one-time message format instead of Tor or some other encrypted online communication. So this is one that's been around for a while. It's starting to get more traction. Cerber, again, very bare bones UI. It's just a text file and a very simple web page. But they do have a FAQ that answers all the questions you might have. Again, these are getting more expensive. 2 Bitcoins to start with, and 4 Bitcoins, if you're late. So they're realizing that people will pay these when they're in a pinch. So they're like, well, let's see how much money we can get away with charging them. This is an interesting new kind of thing that we're seeing is there's rivalry between ransomware. So they will try and sabotage each other so that they can gain market share. So one set of ransomware folks hacked the other one, released all of their keys so that people wouldn't have to pay. So they're trying to put the competition out of business so that they can be the only ones, that are in business here. So they released a zip file with 3,500 keys that had actually infected people. And that allowed people who'd been encrypted, who happened to luck out and hadn't paid the ransom yet, to get their key out of that file and decrypt their particular infection. So this is an example of ransomware as a service. So you don't have to write your own ransomware anymore. You can just go out onto the darknet, pay these guys to download their infrastructure or use their infrastructure. They'll take a cut of the service. You make your own ransomware and start sending it out. So this is the perfect, work from home opportunity. Yeah, exactly. So they take a 25% cut of any successful infections where the ransom gets paid. If you're making, up to 5 Bitcoin a week. But if you're doing high volume business and you're really successful, they'll take a higher cut. So, make sure you read your terms before you embark on a ransomware as a service endeavor. Make sure you're getting a fair share of the pie. All right, so Mac, smaller market share overall, but still a worthwhile target, especially if they're going after some of the less savvy computer folks out there who, creative types who are on the Mac don't necessarily have even less, technical skills than your average Windows user. What? Yes, that may have been the case once upon a time, but I think the only reason there's fewer Mac infections now is because there's less of a target vector. But it's, with a 10% market share, it's worthwhile going after them to some extent.
Can we now agree that the new term we just learned is that Mac user is a code name for less technical savvy user?
Yes, yeah, you can go with that. So the way they're infecting you is when you install the Transmission BitTorrent app. So if you are trying to, download torrents, Transmission's a very popular Mac BitTorrent client. So they release an infected version. It's got a file in it called general.rtf. So it masquerades as a simple text file. It's actually an executable, and it waits 3 days after you install this BitTorrent client to actually do anything. So, initially it looks like everything's fine, but 3 days later it starts running the payload. So after 3 days, that file executes, drops a file called kernel service into the user's library directory. So they try and name it something, looks like it's some system file or something innocuous. So if you're looking at the process monitor, it's not going to jump out at you as like ransomware. So it collects the Mac's model name, UUID, and then uploads that to their command servers. And this one's still a work in progress. So when our researchers analyzed this code, they found a bunch of stuff in there that isn't actually live yet. So they're kind of prototyping this and getting it out there to see if it's successful, and then they're kind of working on improving it. So there's some functions in there that aren't live yet, but are on the way, like trying to encrypt your time machine backup. So it will not only encrypt the files on the machine, it'll try and go out and find a time machine backup, encrypt all that stuff, so you can't just restore from backup. And again, a lot of people think you've got time machine backup, you're protected, right? You can just roll back to a previous version. But if this variant is successful, it'll go up and encrypt the entire time machine drive. So all of their versioning is not going to help them. All right, so Bitcoins. Again, it's a very easy way to send money, very hard to trace. One of the things they're doing to make it even harder to trace is this idea of Bitcoin laundering. So they will mix a whole bunch of Bitcoin transactions into one big transaction. So it's a way of trying to obfuscate even any attempts to track down where the transaction's going to. So it used to be you had to actually launder your cash. Now you don't have to anymore because it's all online. It used to be gift cards and money mules and stuff like that. So they actually will, help you download, encrypt browser, create a Bitcoin wallet, put some Bitcoins in there, and send it to the correct Bitcoin address. And the Bitcoin transactions are publicly available. So to avoid this attempt to analyze the transaction and figure out the the origin and the endpoint, yeah, go ahead.
Are there any legitimate uses of Bitcoin? My business that's because he so regularly has to pay rent somewhere. Actually, he's been doing it for several years.
So yeah, so there are some legitimate uses. For instance, so WikiLeaks was accepting donations, and then they got pressure from the government to shut down. Visa and MasterCard shut them down and said, we're no longer allowing you to use our network to accept payment. So if it's something like that where you're trying to evade, government oppression, Bitcoins are a good way to get around that. But just like torrenting, I would imagine 99% is illegitimate and 1% is legitimate. Sorry? Yes.
A lot of Bitcoin usage that's in the not this type of vein is tax avoidance. If you're looking to maneuver money, anytime you want to maneuver money, your government will monitor it. Bitcoin is relatively
Yep.
very, very easy with Bitcoin to move money off the shore.
Yeah, exactly. You also avoid merchant account transaction fees. So if you don't want to have to pay a middleman, BitTorrent's another good way of doing that.
They might save 2-3% on every transaction.
Exactly. Yeah, your average merchant account, is 2 to 3% of the transactions. So if you don't want to pay Visa or MasterCard that fee, then you can use Bitcoins. But yeah, it's...
Any MSBs accepting Bitcoin? I just want to know.
Yeah. Who does? Dell? All right, good to know. And this Bitcoin laundering service does take a small fee. So again, you're paying some middleman for the added layer of security of going through a bundling service. All right, so this is some stuff from Black Hat 2016, which our researchers go to and try and stay current with what's going on. Some very interesting things to come out of that. So hacks for cars. You guys all have the fob that lets you get into your car. So one of the tricks they'll use to steal your car is they'll have a range extender. So you're asleep in your bed, your keys are on your night table, your car's outside. Your car's not detecting your fob because it's far enough away. They'll go in with a range extender, which will talk to the fob and extend that range out to the car. So the car thinks you're standing next to it with the fob, and then they just open the door, turn it on, and drive away. Obviously, this is a one-time operation. So once they turn the car off at their destination, but at that point, maybe they're in a chop shop and they don't really care about starting the car again. So this is very simple. I mean, you don't have to hack into the car or anything. All you're doing is making use of the legitimate function of the fob and amplifying that communication rather than trying to have to hack anything. So it's very clever innovation in car theft technology. Again, useful if you're wanting to steal someone's car for a prank or something. So here's someone caught doing this on a security camera. So they're going up there with their range extender. It's basically just a big high-gain antenna. Hold it up to the window for best signal strength to try and find the fob in the house. And then they open the car and drive off. Do you guys hear about this one? Someone did a proof of concept ransomware for a thermostat. So this was I think it's a Linux-based thermostat, and they wrote some code to, hack in and present you with this pay 1 Bitcoin to get control of your temperature back. Yeah. No, there is Linux, ransomware out there. And again, I mean, if you're smart, you just reboot this to factory settings, right? There's no data you care about to lose on here. But if you're not smart, you're like, oh my God, the temperature is 99 degrees and I don't know what to do. I'll just pay them the money, right? And again, so this was just a researcher proof of concept. This hasn't been seen in the wild, but, your Nest thermostat may be hacked in the future. So yeah, this whole Internet of Things was really big at Black Hat. There's a lot of people, demonstrating vulnerabilities in everything from cars to thermostats to fridges to home security systems, cameras, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so some quick tips around ransomware. Okay, so you want some kind of endpoint security that's not signature-based, whether it's us or Cylance or Barkley or somebody else doing something a little different from the tradition. You want to make sure there's something on the endpoint and that's, trying to prevent phishing attacks, trying to prevent, some of these exploits that we know about. So yeah, have something that protects web traffic, that tries to intercept this malware that's trying to infect the machine or trying to get around the settings or the AV in particular. Again, you want some reliable backup and business continuity. Make sure your backups are air-gapped enough so that the ransomware can't just encrypt those too. So you want to make sure that you have some kind of offsite backup that's not continuously being overwritten or isn't accessible directly from the machine, because the malware will now try and go and find network shares, backups, and try and encrypt everything it can to try and make sure it catches your backup. The other thing you want to do is you want something that's fast, right? Because if you have good backups and it's going to take you a day to restore everything, you might as well pay the ransom, right? Because that lost day of productivity is going to be way more than a Bitcoin or two. So you want something you can switch over to very quickly, or you can get your data back and up and running very quickly. Macros and auto run should be off. So make sure you turn that off everywhere. Make sure you don't give people permissions to turn it back on again. There aren't that many legitimate reasons to use macros. And usually you can find some other way of doing things, but macros are just so inherently insecure at this point, it's better to just avoid them. No, we don't get into that level of trying to change your system configuration, across your policy. We'd rather let you guys do it because, there's probably better tools for managing that stuff that's already out there. So we just kind of recommend that you do it. We don't try and do it for you. So, and it's a little, would you really want software on your network going around changing all those policies without you knowing what it's doing? Yeah, it may be something that we add in the future, but for now, it's, we're just kind of saying it's up to you to kind of set this kind of policy stuff, and we'll recommend and tell you how to do it, but let you do it. So block volume shadow copy service. Set restrictions on file extensions and directories that stuff can be run from, because stuff that you open from an email, it's going to open in a certain location, so don't let stuff run from there. There's lots of good lists online now for all the different file extensions that you don't want to allow, block coming in through your email service or filter for. And again, nothing's ever going to be 100%, but the more you can do to, kind of lock that stuff down, the less attack vectors there are. And at this point, you need a multi-layered approach, right? You need endpoint security, you need email filtering, you need good backups, you need, to educate your users, and you need to lock down your networks and systems to try and avoid the known attack vectors. So user education, don't let people open attachments, either remove them completely, or the people that do need attachments like accounts payable, accounts receivable, things like that, make sure those people who are particularly vulnerable are educated, because obviously they do need to receive what looks like a PDF or Word doc, with an invoice in it, but that's an easy attack vector for somebody to get someone to open a file and click enable macros or use some other exploit. All right, so that's it for this presentation. If you guys have other questions, feel free to throw them out now. I can switch over to the other deck that I stole and show you some of the stuff in there if you guys are interested.
Not on the topic that you're covering directly, but on the community, you had hinted that Weber was looking into IoT security in the future. That's something, it's obviously a research topic right now.
Yes.
Think about what Weber is looking at or considering or planning to share with us.
Yes. So our network that we've developed for the endpoint protection, we already have an API that we license out to other security vendors. So they may make a firewall appliance that talks to our API that does the lookups for URLs and IP addresses into our database. And then they, pay us a licensing fee for the use of that. So we're extending that to the IoT space to make it easier for IoT manufacturers to do those same types of security calls directly from within the code that they're writing for the smart refrigerator. So the idea there is we make, a custom API just for IoT that's specialized for that embedded space to make it easy for them to do those calls, because typically, it's a lot smaller memory and processor and other limitations to work with. So that's the basic idea, and that's what we're working on right now. So we've made some announcements and press releases about it. It's not ready for prime time yet, but it is something that's being worked on. And our idea there is, car manufacturers, smart device manufacturers, they're not thinking about this. They don't have the in-house expertise. Let's make it easy for them to just license, API calls from us to protect those devices. And the basic approach is, a lot of these devices will allow connections from anything. They don't even bother to check who's telling them to do stuff. So over-the-air updates or other, commands remotely, they're not checking to make sure that's who it says it is. So that's a very basic level of security that, we're trying to help people implement. So you can at least say, this thing that's trying to talk to your thermostat is, a botnet instead of the manufacturer or instead of your phone or something like that. So, yeah. All right.
So along that same vein, you mentioned to me in a message that you, and I hope I'm not mentioning something, you mentioned about the framework.
Framework for IoT? Yeah.
So,
What did I say? I don't remember.
something basically that they could actually additionally license your software for them to write, so they don't have to write the whole baseline code.
Yeah, exactly.
They would have an entire framework to start from for the entire product.
Yeah, so we give a framework to the manufacturer. Yeah, they incorporate that into their code and license it from us. So that's the basic idea behind our IoT approach. So that way there's nothing you have to install on the device. It's just something that we hope gets taken up by the device manufacturers. We're not trying to make antivirus for IoT because there's too many different devices. It's already hard enough supporting, Android and iPhone, and, we don't do Windows Phone because there's not enough of a market share. So rather than having to write something specific for all the different devices, we let them just do calls into our service. All right, so we've got a few minutes left, so I can power through some of this stuff if you guys are interested. This is another deck I stole from a different guy. It's got a few more in-depth stuff about crypto ransomware at the end. So I'll probably skip pretty quickly through some of this stuff to there, because you're probably more interested in that than you are about knowing how web works, and you probably have a good idea of that anyway from being on the various communities. So yeah, I'll skip through some of this. This is some of the same stuff as in the other slides, just talking about how many endpoints that we're securing, OEM partnerships, MSPs, customers like that. So this is a slide that kind of lays out how our cloud infrastructure is set up, all the different ways that we gather information in there. So it could be through customers directly, security partners, other databases, sensors that we've got out there to collect stuff on the internet. Bright Cloud's doing their continuous scanning. And then these are some of the folks that use some of our technology already through the APIs for some of the security stuff. So even if you're not a direct customer of us, you may be using some of our technology under the hood anyway. Oops. A bunch more numbers. Basically, we've been doing this longer than anybody, so there are other people using the same approach, but we've gathered a lot more data than they have and kind of have the infrastructure to support all this stuff. Again, polymorphic malware, some of the same points as the other ones. Another thing we're seeing is that there's no clear differentiator between what categories of URLs and where the infections are coming from. In fact, ironically, some of the ones you would think would be the most dangerous, like porn, have really made an effort to clean themselves up because they already have a bad reputation. So you're less likely to get ransomware from a porn site than you may be from somewhere else. Yep. Again, lots of people will fall victim to phishing attacks. This over here is some of the UI you'll see if you're using the ransomware as a service. So you can customize here, how many Bitcoins to ask for? Do you lock down the computer? Do you try and preserve CPU usage so it doesn't trigger any flags that the CPU is spiking because you're encrypting all this stuff? So you can customize all kinds of stuff in the ransomware as a service and, start your own business if you want to go down that route. They're using a lot of ways to evade detection, not only from us, but other AV and endpoint security, threat injection, process hollowing. So they try and take over existing known good processes, inject code into them, and use them for their purposes. So we have to figure out how to spot and block that. And it's a continual back and forth with the ransomware authors. This is all stuff about mobile. So yeah, let me jump into the tips because that's probably, this has a few more things than were in the other slide deck. So you want to use some kind of ransomware protection, whether it's us or some other manufacturer, just have something on there because that's one layer of defense you definitely want to have. Again, back up your data, like I mentioned in the other deck. Show hidden file extensions. A lot of times they'll try and disguise it, so they'll have a file called something.pdf.exe. File extensions are hidden, so it looks like something.pdf. They're like, well, PDFs are safe to open. My user training didn't tell me PDFs were bad, so they'll open it up, and instead it's an executable or it's a Word doc or something else that they weren't expecting. So some kind of email filtering because email attachments is such a big vector. So you want to use some kind of service, and you also want to potentially block types of attachments based on file extension or other properties. Don't let anything run from app data or local app data. Anything that might be somewhere that the file gets saved with, non-admin Windows permissions. You want to block those places from running executables that you didn't explicitly install for them. If there's legitimate software that is badly written and needs to run from those areas, you'll need to make an exception for that. Oops. Which slide am I at? Oh, disable RDP, remote desktops, becoming a big vector now. So either use something else or use some kind of two-factor authentication to make sure that it's not an attack vector for your machines. Let me go back to the slide before. I think it's got more details. So if they trick you in going to a phishing site, they get you to put in your credentials. Now the RDP software can log in remotely, and there's not really any restrictions on and who can log in or attempts. So use some kind of product that gives you the ability to do two-factor authentication or limit. Here's the legitimate login sites that you're allowing people to come into. Does that make sense?
People do it nonstop. They put jump off. There's better. I don't have any customers that firewalls don't allow.
Yes.
I set that rule up.
Yeah. So if you're blocking that, or if you don't expose that to the internet, good. Yeah, that's the way to do it. But a lot of people don't, and even if you do, I mean, it's worth disabling anyway, because if somebody finds some other way onto your network, then yeah. You just don't want to leave an insecure service running if you don't have to. So. So yeah, keep your software patched and up to date. There's so many exploits coming out right now. These guys have so much money, they can hire the best security researchers that might otherwise be white hats to go work for them to try and find exploits. They can go buy 0 days. They're bidding with the NSA to try and buy the latest and greatest, and they have a lot of money to play with. So there's so many vulnerabilities. Software is so complex that if you're not staying on top of your patches, then if a lot of people don't patch stuff, and then older stuff like Heartbleed or other vulnerabilities that are still out there, they're still checking to see if those are vectors to get into your system. So yeah, educating users, phishing is a big one. It's probably the biggest vector still is email attachments. So like I mentioned, these ransomware, they'll go out and encrypt everything they can find. They'll scan map drives, they'll scan non-mapped, accessible shares. They'll try and find anything on the network they can to encrypt. So lock down permissions, don't give people write access to stuff they don't need. Don't just give people access to everything on the file server because it's easy, because that makes it easier for these infections to spread. Use some kind of pop-up blocker. Again, it's very easy for websites to inject malicious code through whatever means, and the more you can block it, whether it's blocking ads or pop-ups, means you're blocking those vectors for malicious things to get in. Because if you think about it, any site that's using some ad service, that's not something they manage or control. They're just relying and hoping that the ads that they're showing are legitimate. So they don't have any direct control over that stuff. So the more you can turn that off, the better. Disable macros. And then we have this guide to avoid being a crypto ransomware victim. It's a PDF that's on our community and on WebRoot's website. So if you want to download that, it delves into some of the stuff in more depth. Or if you can't find it, just shoot me an email or a PM and I can send it to you.
Is it recommended white paper or is it actually?
No, it's actually useful. This stuff is written by our threat researchers. So that guy, Tyler, some of the other guys that work in the advanced malware removal team are the ones writing these guides. And then we get, writers to polish it and make it look good, and we get Marcom to make fancy graphics like that. But the original, actual technical stuff is being written by technical people. So it's not as fluffy as it could otherwise be. So yeah, we've got an MSP program. So if any of you who are MSPs, we're doing a couple things. One, we're trying to make it easy for you with our console to support multiple customers, so you can do a multi-site setup. We're also doing a lot of integrations with RMM software. So whatever you use, we probably have a plugin for it. And then the other thing that's coming that hasn't officially been announced yet, but we're launching an API directly in the console for you guys to use. So if you want to do your own calls directly into the console to pull information out, to do custom reporting, that's currently in beta and is probably launching sometime next month. So if you wanted to write your own stuff that's going to, talk to the console and pull that information, you'll be able to do that fairly shortly. All right, so that's all I have, unless anyone else has any other questions. Going once, twice. All right, thanks, and yeah, come see me. I've got a stack of Kiko cards if you need some, and if you have any other questions, yeah, just you want the whole stack? Is that what you're saying? No, and my philosophy is like, if you guys try this out at home and like it, you're more likely to use it yourself, recommend it to other people. So I would love to give free AV to every sysadmin in the world, because that's the best marketing, is getting to try out the home version, which uses the same technology under the hood. It's just doesn't have all the bells and whistles on the console side for reporting, because most home users never even log into the console, let alone use any of it. But at least you get to try it out at home and see how it works and see if it's doing well. So, all right, that's it for me.